Under a supporting barrage of tank and artillery fire, the Egyptian army recrossed the canal. There was no opposition, the Israeli army was 15 miles away and no one had told them. The first targets were the 35 Bar-Lev strongholds on the canal bank, manned by only 1,000 Israeli troops. .107mm recoilless rifles then cut a path for the infantry through the wire and mines. Heavy mortars firing from 8 miles away blasted the interior of the strongholds. They forced the Israelis into their deep underground bunkers and kept their heads down for the infantry crossing. They scored a direct hit on their target, an Egyptian prepared Israeli flag. The task for the infantry was to maintain a foothold in Sinai for 48 hours before the tanks and artillery could be brought across. The hold-up was the sand ramparts built by the Israelis. They were up to 100 feet high and needed ladders to climb. They took their flag up first. It was a display of Egyptian heroics. Last October, it was a machine gun. In the second wave came the portable infantry, guns and rockets. In suitcases on their backs, they arrived with the secret Saga anti-tank rocket that devastated the Israeli tanks. But they gave the Israelis fair warning. So, with screams of "God is great, I have a target in my sights," they stormed the Bar-Lev line with flamethrowers, rockets and guns. With careless abandon, they shot up everything in sight, but it wasn't difficult. No one was firing back. Simultaneously, the Bitter Lakes were crossed with Yugoslavian amphibious troop carriers. This was the attack on Kabrit stronghold. It held out for 2 days with 35 Israelis inside. They were underground and called on their own artillery to shell them and to dislodge the Egyptians. But it failed and all of them either surrendered or were killed. Now, with the infantry in Sinai, they had the job of opening the ramparts. That was nearly 2 tons of dynamite, the noisiest but not the most successful way of doing it. A young officer hit on the simple idea of hosing the sandbanks down. Their reenactment was chaotic. One officer was nearly demented with despair. He finally fell in the canal. 2 of the 3 pumps wouldn't start. One brigadier blamed Britain because the pumps were originally bought from us for irrigation. But even out of the chaos came an ever-growing hole, although we gave up when the sun went down. In all, they cut 60 gaps this way, each taking up to 10 hours. Among the latest Russian equipment used to take the tanks across the canal was this GSP tank pontoon, designed by the Russians for crossing European rivers, but ideal for the canal. It's just two amphibious lorries linked together. On these, the first Russian-built T-54, T-55 and T-62 tanks crossed the canal into the Sinai desert to attack the Bar-Lev line and the Israeli defenses. Another surprise for the Israelis was the speed of the Egyptian bridge-building operation. With Russian PMP pontoons used for the first time in combat, the bridge was constructed in 45 minutes. The Israelis expected it would take the Egyptians 2 hours to bridge the canal. The Egyptian engineers with Russian know-how made it in less than half that time. And last October, this was done under artillery fire and rocket attacks from Israeli Phantoms. Again, it all looked chaotic, but each Egyptian soldier knew his job and the bridge was completed, ready for the tanks to roll across and deploy in Sinai. "1,400 Egyptian tanks crossed into Sinai last October. Under the disengagement agreement, there should be only 30 tanks and 7,000 men in Sinai today. Anxious to put on a good display, though, they more than doubled their number. Thankfully, as we deployed in battle formation in the desert, there was no response from either the Israeli army or the United Nations forces in the buffer zone between the Israelis and the Egyptians. Among the Egyptian missiles were these BM-21 rockets. In Sinai during the October War, their role was to strike at tanks and artillery, counter-attacking the Egyptian advance. It's amongst the most sophisticated and expensive equipment. It's a recoilless weapon fired from the cab of the lorry. The vehicle remains static, but the blast from the rocket tubes is lethal for 200 yards. This was live ammunition, and every rocket costs the Egyptians £800. But it was the potential of the infantry's new Saga anti-tank rockets carried in suitcases on their backs that most surprised the Israelis. They said they'd never come up against anything like it. The rockets were set up in ambush in the desert, connected to a control panel, and the observer fires them and guides them through his periscope. The rocket is guided through a fine wire fired from the observer. It's just like flying a toy aeroplane. Every Saga anti-tank man has to fire 100 rockets before he's considered fully trained. At £3,000 a time, it's an expensive way to go to war. But these were practice rockets fired at their own tanks with smoke warheads rather than high explosive. With their range of a mile, it would be almost impossible for the tank men to spot them. Another new weapon is the Saga rocket, mounted in an armoured car. It carries 6 Sagas and is more mobile than the infantryman's missile. Apart from missiles, we also saw the Shilka anti-aircraft gun guarding the bridgeheads. This is capable of firing 8,000 rounds a minute at low-flying aircraft. It's an impressive display of the weapons and methods used by the Egyptian army to cross the Suez Canal. But it must be said that at the end of the war, the Israeli army controlled more territory than they held at the beginning, and they lost considerably fewer men and weapons than did the Arab armies. It wasn't sophisticated weapons like this that settled the Middle Eastern war. It was the Arab oil embargo and the consequent political pressures on Israel and the efforts of Dr. Kissinger. But to the Egyptian army, the crossing of the Suez Canal was the epic operation. They haven't had much to boast about, and the fact that they're showing off now suggests just how much the successful crossing of the canal has meant to their morale and confidence. Keith Hatfield, News at 10, with the Egyptian Third Army on the Suez Canal.